This is X, and he's a great guy, high IQ. He's a high IQ individual.
X, should we help President Trump?
Yeah.
Well, you have.
One moment, Elon Musk was delivering a grandiose speech, and the next, his 4-year-old son, A-12, snatched the microphone from him live on television. The crowd held its breath. What followed was completely unexpected. Unfazed by the sudden attention, the child made a bold statement that left everyone in shock. This spontaneous moment took the world by surprise, and his small yet powerful declaration would forever be etched in internet history. The scene was electrifying. Cameras were rolling, lights were blazing, and the audience was on the edge of their seats. This wasn't just another event. It was an Elon Musk event, one of those moments where people expected revolutionary ideas, wild predictions, and maybe even a robot or two. American flags lined the stage, giving the event an almost presidential vibe. In the audience, tech billionaires and curious fans eagerly awaited an announcement that could change the world. But no one, absolutely no one, was prepared for what was about to happen. Right in the front row sat Grimes with her 4-year-old son, A-12, known simply as X. Their presence alone was a surprise. A murmur ran through the crowd. Was this planned? Was X about to make his debut as Tesla's youngest engineer? Dressed in her usual futuristic, goth-inspired attire, Grimes did her best to keep her son calm. But this kid had the energy of a rocket at liftoff. His wide eyes took in everything: the stage, the cameras, the sea of spectators. His mind seemed to be working overtime. Meanwhile, Elon Musk took the stage to thunderous applause. His expression remained impassive, calculated. The face of a man who had probably spent the last 48 hours thinking about colonizing Mars. He raised his hand, quieting the room. Thank you for being here tonight. And most of all, thank you for making this possible. Thank you. His voice echoed through the massive hall and across millions of screens worldwide. Tonight, we're unveiling an idea that could redefine the future. An idea that challenges everything we thought was possible. The audience was captivated. X, however, was far less interested. Sitting on Grimes' lap, the little boy wiggled like an AI trying to solve an impossible equation. He tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at his father on stage. Grimes whispered something to him, probably a "Stay still, little guy." But X had no intention of staying put. At first, it was just small movements, light twitches. Then, with the determination of a child on a sugar rush, he wriggled free from his mother's hold. The audience chuckled, thinking it was just a cute moment. But X had a mission. His eyes locked on the stage like a heat-seeking missile. Then, he stood up. Grimes reached out to stop him. Too late. X-A-12 was already on the move. The audience's chuckles turned to gasps of surprise as the boy confidently walked toward the stage. The cameras captured every second. Millions of viewers, glued to their screens, watched him weave his way toward one of the most famous men on the planet, completely unfazed by the spotlight and the massive crowd. Elon Musk noticed a shadow moving in his peripheral vision. For a split second, he hesitated. Something was off. His mind, usually busy calculating interplanetary trajectories, had to make an emergency switch in priorities. Before anyone could react, X-A-12 made his move. 1 second, Elon Musk was deep into his speech about the future of civilization. The next second, his 4-year-old son had snatched the microphone right out of his hands, live on television. The world stood still. For 2 long seconds, the room fell into complete silence. Only the faint hum of the live broadcast could be heard. Everyone present, CEOs, journalists, space enthusiasts, watched in shock. Millions of viewers' jaws dropped, witnessed this tiny boy holding the microphone as if he had just dethroned the CEO of Tesla. He wasn't nervous or hesitant. The cameras, the spotlights, the fact that he had just interrupted one of the most anticipated events of the year, none of it mattered. He had something to say. Grimes had half risen from her seat, her hand frozen in midair, as if she wanted to call him back, knowing full well it was already too late. Her face showed a mix of amusement, slight panic, and that resigned look parents get when their child does something completely unpredictable in public. The crowd shifted, some whispering, others laughing nervously. Was this planned? Was it a surprise reveal? Had Elon just passed the torch to his son mid-speech? Then, a ripple of laughter swept through the room. To his credit, Elon recovered quickly. He took a small step to the side and tilted his head toward X with an amused, though slightly uncertain, expression. "Looks like we have a new speaker tonight," he said lightly, but his eyes flicked toward Grimes, as if silently asking her, "What now?" X, still clutching the microphone, looked up at his father. The audience held its breath. What was he going to say? A-12 stood there, alone, under the blazing spotlights, gripping the microphone with both hands, as if he was about to deliver the speech of a lifetime. He barely reached his father's waist, yet he stood exactly where Elon Musk had just spoken about the future of humanity. The silence was absolute. Every person in that room, from Silicon Valley CEOs to journalists who had covered countless Tesla launches, hung on his every word. Was this just a cute moment from a curious child? Or were they witnessing the most unexpected press conference of all time? For a moment, X looked out at the sea of faces before him, blinking at the massive crowd staring back at him. The giant screen behind him only emphasized his small stature, yet he seemed unfazed. He didn't fidget, didn't look for his mom. He was there, fully in control. Then, in a voice surprisingly clear for a child his age, he spoke. "Daddy says robots are going to take over the world." The sentence hit like a meteor. You could almost hear a collective, "What?" sweep through the room. A few nervous laughs echoed, but most of the audience remained frozen. Some glanced around, as if waiting for Elon to confirm or deny it. Others stared at the little boy who had just dropped, without flinching, a statement straight out of a dystopian sci-fi movie. Elon's face shifted from slight amusement to a mix of surprise and, "Oh no, he didn't just say that!" For the first time that night, he looked rattled. Usually, he kept his cool under any circumstances. But now, his son had just announced a robot apocalypse, live on stage. Grimes, still seated, had both hands over her mouth, her eyes darting nervously between her son and Elon, as if she were watching a slow-motion car crash. She knew X was a sharp kid, but she probably didn't expect this. The atmosphere had changed. What started as a light-hearted scene, a little boy running on stage, now carried a whole different weight. Because yes, X was only 4, but he didn't come up with that on his own. He stood there, gripping the microphone like a seasoned speaker, waiting for his audience to process the impact of his words. He wasn't nervous or restless. He had no idea that he had just triggered a mini-existential crisis in a room full of the world's most influential people. The silence dragged on. Everyone was in shock. Did that kid really just say what I think he said? It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. That childlike clarity, making even the wildest statements sound completely believable. Daddy says robots are going to take over the world. Not maybe. Not it could happen. Just a cold, simple statement delivered without hesitation. Usually, Elon always had a comeback ready, a joke, a way to deflect attention. But this time, he hesitated. The man who always had an answer didn't have one. His son had just announced the AI apocalypse live, and all eyes were on him to confirm, deny, or explain why his 4-year-old was already talking about world domination by machines. Grimes, still seated, seemed to be cycling through every possible emotion at once. Her hands clasped, her face frozen somewhere between amusement, horror, and a silent prayer for this moment to end immediately. An awkward laugh rippled through the crowd. Some spectators laughed nervously, hoping it was just an innocent child's remark. Others exchanged worried glances, trying to figure out if what they had just heard was a joke or a hidden message. Did this kid just reveal his father's true plans? Was he the first official spokesperson for Skynet? And just as the tension began to ease, X tightened his grip on the microphone. He wasn't done. "Daddy says I can build robots when I grow up." If the first sentence was a meteor, this one was the aftershock. This time, Elon reacted faster. He stepped forward gently, placing a cautious hand on his son's shoulder. His expression was too controlled. The kind of forced calm you use when you're trying to put out a fire before it spreads. "That's a big ambition," he said, forcing a smile. "But let's save the world-changing speeches for a little later, okay?" The audience burst into laughter, but the tension still hung in the air. Elon slowly reached out to take the microphone, moving carefully. X hesitated. His tiny fingers remained wrapped around the metal, his expression serious, as if he knew he had just said something important and wasn't ready to leave the stage just yet. Then, after one last moment of hesitation, he finally let go. Grimes, now standing at the edge of the stage, motioned for him to come back to her. She wasn't panicked or demanding, just eager for this moment to end. But X hesitated. Instead of running to her, he turned and looked up at Elon, his face filled with pure, unshakable confidence. "You said it," he murmured. His voice was low, but the microphone caught it. Elon blinked, visibly thrown off. His usually composed expression faltered for just a second. Then, with a quick nod, he placed a hand on X's shoulder and gently guided him off the stage. And that's when the crowd erupted. The applause started as a scattered clapping before building into a full-blown ovation. Not for a major tech announcement or a groundbreaking innovation, but for this moment. A moment that would be talked about for years. A moment that would be clipped and replayed thousands of times online. But beneath the applause, the energy in the room was strange. People weren't just clapping out of amusement. They were thinking, processing. Because this wasn't just a child blurting out a random sentence. It was something else. As if, maybe, just maybe, Elon's 4-year-old son had just revealed something he wasn't supposed to. When X reached Grimes, she knelt down and hugged him, holding him just a fraction longer than necessary. Her face was a mix of relief, disbelief, and, "Did that really just happen?" She whispered something to him, her lips barely moving. But her expression showed she was still trying to understand what had just occurred. The cameras caught her glance toward Elon. She didn't say anything, but her face spoke for her. "What now?" Still standing behind his podium, Elon let out a quick breath. He took a second, just long enough to grip the edges of the podium and center himself, then let out a small laugh, a little too forced. "Well," he said, his voice just a bit too tense. "You never know what's going to happen live." The audience laughed politely, but the strange tension lingered. That floating feeling that something much bigger had just happened. Elon took a deep breath, rolled his shoulders back as if resetting himself, then continued. "What my son just shared, though, perhaps a bit ahead of his time, does reflect the kind of ambition we hope to inspire in future generations. Big ideas, bold visions, and, why not, a little bit of mischief along the way." A few laughs rose from the audience, but the air remained electric, charged with a static energy. Some people straightened in their seats, exchanging quick glances, while others seemed to still be digesting what they had just heard. Meanwhile, Grimes had settled back into her seat, X perched on her lap, completely unfazed by the chaos he had just unleashed. He had already moved on, fiddling with a small toy he had pulled from his pocket, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't, with just one sentence, stolen the show from his father in front of millions of viewers. Elon, meanwhile, had regained his momentum, carrying on with his presentation with his usual ease. But every now and then, his gaze would drift toward his son and Grimes, as if he was bracing himself for another surprise. And honestly, so was the audience. Because let's be real, the speech, the big announcement, the cutting-edge tech Elon was about to unveil, all of it had already taken a back seat. Tonight wasn't about tech anymore. It was about this moment. About a 4-year-old and his blunt, spontaneous admission. And the unsettling weight it carried. Was it just a kid repeating something he'd overheard? Or did X just confirm something Elon wasn't ready to make public? This question still hung in the air. And just when everything seemed to be calming down, X leaned towards Grimes and whispered something. Her face barely changed, but there was a slight tremor, a fleeting spark in her eyes. Whatever he had just said, she really didn't want him to repeat it out loud. With a barely perceptible movement, she shook her head. Her arms tightened slightly around him, a silent plea. Please, not again. But X had other plans. Before she could stop him, he slipped out of her arms. This time, he didn't run to the center of the stage. He didn't grab the microphone. He simply walked to the edge, his small figure framed by the spotlights. And he just stood there, watching. The audience fell completely silent. Grimes turned pale. Her hand lifted slightly, as if to reach for him, but she already knew it was too late. Elon paused mid-sentence. Then, in that same soft yet perfectly clear voice, X declared, "Daddy said that soon he'll build very smart robots." The words were not dramatic. They weren't shouted. But they landed with a startling impact. So simple. And yet, not simple at all. A moment of suspended silence. Elon was mid-sentence when it happened. The sound of his son's voice made him freeze. And for a fraction of a second, the tension on his face disappeared. The corners of his lips twitched, as if he was torn between amusement and deep concern. He exhaled. Then finally he said, "You're not wrong." His tone was light, but precise, as if he was accepting the fact that his 4-year-old son had, once again, completely hijacked his event. "Looks like we know who'll take over when I retire." The crowd burst into laughter. Applause erupted. And in an instant, the tension shattered like glass. Elon stepped forward and effortlessly picked up X, carrying him back to Grimes, who looked both relieved and exhausted. "Well then," Elon continued, throwing a quick wink at the audience. "Let's get back to tonight's big ideas, before my son decides to reveal them all for me." Another wave of laughter filled the room. The atmosphere had lightened. But something still lingered beneath the surface. A persistent feeling that tonight, it wasn't the technology that left an impression. When the event ended, Elon wrapped up his speech with his usual confidence. But everyone in that room already knew the evening belonged to someone else. Backstage, away from the cameras and the buzzing crowd, the Musk family had retreated to a quiet corner. Grimes was cradling X on her lap, holding him as if she was still trying to process what had just happened. X, on the other hand, completely unfazed. He was happily playing with the tiny toy he had hidden in his pocket, as if the last 20 minutes hadn't just sent shockwaves through the tech world. Grimes broke the silence first. She let out a long sigh before shaking her head. "Well," she murmured, half to herself, half to Elon, "that was definitely not how I pictured tonight." There was a hint of amusement in her voice, but also a certain disbelief, as if she was still trying to wrap her head around the reality of it all. Elon leaned back in his seat, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully before letting out a light laugh. "He's got flair," he admitted. Backstage, the hum of the event could still be heard beyond the curtain, but in their corner, a strange, almost surreal calm had settled in. Elon and Grimes sat side by side, watching their son, who had just unwittingly made headlines around the world. A-12 was comfortably perched on his mother's lap, swinging his little feet as he fiddled with his tiny toy. No worry, no regret, just a 4-year-old who had spoken his mind before instantly moving on to something else. Elon exhaled, shaking his head with a wry smile. Maybe a bit too much flair. Grimes gave him a look, raising an eyebrow. So you really did tell him he could build robots one day? Elon shrugged, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. We talked about it a few times. I just didn't think he'd choose live TV for his official announcement. They shared a quiet laugh, but there was something unspoken beneath the surface, as if they were still piecing together what had really just happened. After a moment, Elon leaned forward slightly and placed a hand on his son's tiny shoulder. You know, he said in a softer tone, you may have stolen the spotlight tonight, but next time, could you give me a little heads up first? A-12 looked up at his father, completely unfazed, and flashed a wide smile. Not a mischievous smile, just the smile of a child who didn't yet understand the magnitude of what he had done. Because he didn't understand. While the whole world analyzed, dissected, and speculated about his words, to him, it was just a simple conversation with his dad. Elon and Grimes exchanged a look. They both knew that this moment, this improbable, unexpected, completely crazy moment, would be talked about for years. But one question lingered. Was it simply the innocent curiosity of a child, or did A-12, in his own way, just reveal something Elon Musk wasn't ready to announce to the world yet? What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you soon for another video.